So what are you supposed to do when you run out of ideas of things to talk about on your podcast? We're gonna tell you all about that in this video. So Gilon, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you have a podcast episode coming up, but you aren't really sure what you want to talk about?
Definitely. I think we all have had that space as a podcaster, for sure.
There are a couple things that you can do, a couple different strategies to generate ideas. I have a few in mind, but I'm curious, Gilon, what are the things that you do to get new ideas, fresh ideas, think outside the box in order to come up with podcast episodes for the future?
Definitely. So I like to think about things that I'm learning that I've found helpful. So I think about the things that I'm learning, things that have been aha moments, and figure out ways to kind of share that with my audience. I've also looked at episodes that have done really well and thought about taking maybe a different angle or bringing someone on that'll talk about that from a different perspective than I have currently talked about.
Yeah, we actually have an entire podcast that purely leverages that. Podcasting Q&A. You send in questions, we answer them. That's almost entirely driven by what our listeners want to hear and what they want to learn from us. So it makes creating ideas very easy because you just go through all the questions that you've heard and that people have submitted and say, which are the ones that we think would make really good podcast episodes. Another thing that can be really helpful is instead of thinking of everything you could possibly talk about, think about the different categories of things that you talk about. So for podcasting, we talk about monetization, we talk about gear, microphones, that kind of stuff, editing software, marketing. And so instead of thinking, what can we talk about in podcasting, just ask like, okay, well, is there a podcast marketing strategy we haven't talked about yet? Is there a new monetization opportunity we haven't covered yet? And just by like breaking it down into like a smaller piece, it feels less intimidating and like you can get ideas quicker. Now, Gilon, if you are just completely at a loss about what to talk about, is there a way that you could actually look at what other podcasters are doing in order to get good ideas for your own show?
Definitely. If you have a niche and you're aware of what your niche is, you can definitely check out other podcasters and look at some of the podcast episodes that they have out, because that may just generate some inspiration for you or some ideas of like, oh, I'd like to talk about this, but from this angle. And so you're not necessarily stealing content. It's inspiration for you to get your brain going, because sometimes it's just that your brain is stuck and is kind of feeling like you're out of ideas. But checking out other podcasters in your niche, talking to other podcasters in your niche can be really helpful to just get the juices flowing in your brain.
And one last thing you can do is, rather than every single week feeling like you're having to come up with a new idea, just set aside some time for like a couple hours to brainstorm lots of ideas. You may have some duds, some things that you know that you definitely never want to use, but you're gonna find some golden nuggets in there as well. So Gilon, is that a strategy that you ever use for your own podcast?
Definitely. The last season of my podcast, I spent some time, I started with a theme and then wrote down every idea that would fit and flow under that theme. And then I got really nerdy and put it into like an Excel spreadsheet. But it was like, it had a nice little schedule, I could think about people that I'd like to slot in there. So it was actually really helpful to batch it that way.
Batching is your friend. Don't be afraid of going outside the box. Get inspired by what other people are doing with their shows. See if your listeners are sending you questions, DMs, emails, asking you to cover certain topics. Look at your stats. See if certain episodes are more popular than others. Make episodes more like that. All these are great ways for you to come up and generate new ideas for things you talk about on your podcast.
Now, you might just find that you just need to take a break from your podcast, and that's okay. Purely fine. But there is a right and a wrong way to do that. And we have a video about that called How to Take a Break from Your Podcast. And so we'll link it below in the description, or you can click the link next to me and watch that video.